Hello, that's me. I last did a development diary before the hack in like September. Because after that, I just stopped working on shit. It tends to happen where something happens, I just give up everything I'm doing. Um, I've had a reoccurring fear. I don't know what places my fear. It's just a feeling I get. But I'm always afraid that Zenforo is going to cancel their license with the forum because of complaints or whatever. And it's something that I believe that they can technically do because it's a private. I mean, it's a private company. It's a lease. It's a license. Why can't they revoke it? You know, they say in their contract. I read through it, their terms of service that they can, it has that term that all these contracts have where it's like we can cancel service for any reason or no reason at all at any time, that kind of thing where it's no, they completely hold themselves uh unliable for maintaining your service. So I've been afraid of the forum losing its license for a while, and I've been thinking, if something happened where they said like, okay, this is the last time you can renew your license, you have a year to get off our fucking software suite or we're going to start suing you, what would I be able to do in that time? And I came to the conclusion that after looking at other software, I would probably just build my own, um, in part because of pride, but in another part because I like knowing exactly what I'm running, and on top of that, they've they've done things that aren't particularly good in terms of their design. I discovered recently while trying to mitigate damage for the forum that they were serving static images, attachments, and proxied images via PHP FPM as opposed to using the send file directive to use the web server to send files, which is what should be sending files. You shouldn't use a intensive, uh, you know, programming application to send streams of data because that's slow as fuck and it chokes your system because it has to go through the web server anyways. So you might as well just skip the fucking PHP FPM and use the web server to begin with. That's what you should be doing. So I had to fix that in the base code, and that was something that I had learned while doing Infinity Next. Because my first instinct was send the files over PHP, but then someone managed to DDoS the website just by pressing F5 on. Well, it's not a DDoS when it's one person, but managed to DOS the site by just pressing F5 on an image, and I had to figure out a way around that, and I did. So part of my inspiration in working on this 5-year dead project is I want to look at all the things that I've done, and I want to take the parts that are good or this complex systems and abstract them as packages I could potentially use in developing a forum in the future should something happen where Zenforo cancels the license. Because it should have been done that way to begin with, but I wasn't. I learned a lot while working on the project. So in the last week or so, I've been working on modernizing the framework because when I started, version 5 of Laravel had just come out, and many years later, there's versions of 5.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 6, and then 7 because they changed their versioning, and their new versioning sucks. But we're now on Laravel 6. And the biggest change, the most significant change that impacted the system was the way that permissions were done. Permissions were done, and were not done at all by the framework. And in 5, halfway through 5, they just sort of kind of figured out like, oh shit, our framework doesn't really have any kind of authentication system. So they were slowly adding components to make up and adding components in weird ways throughout the framework to make up an authentication scaffolding. And then over time, uh, they ripped all that out, put it into its own package, and then called it auth, which now makes sense. It's a cohesive system now. So I had to take, and I'll try to show my code. I think I can change it to Atom on this. I can. The permission system is really, really, really complicated. It was at one point there was this trait called permittable, and it was many times longer than it is now. I think it was like 2,000 lines, and that was because most of the permission checks were just this: can do something, and then it would go to permission, and permission, or what used to be called can, is this function over here that does a check, and it does a check based on the content and based on the permission, which then goes to get permission. And get permission is much longer. And like that's one part of it, and that's one part of it, and this is a really big one. And then in the there's two really big ones, and then in the permission object itself, there's another static. Well, that's a different piece of logic, but there's many working parts of this code together just to determine if someone has the permission to do something. It's really complicated, and when they added these policy gates, it simplified things in a lot of ways, and it was a way of integrating permissions more eloquently into the views and into the code itself. So I had to retrofit everything that I had built in a way that worked with these policies, and now I've got the policies working, and they're very orderly, very tidy. It's the same kind of thing as the permittable class, where it's just like can do this, can do this, can do this with logic sanity checks and stuff to make sure that that's possible. But it makes more sense to have policies because they're based on the content as opposed to just having a giant class where every possible check is there. The one big shortcoming of their design, though, was that they work on the assumption, and I'll just pull up something and do pseudocode, where if you do in a view can do something, and then you want to have the HTML here that shows up only when someone can do something. They operated for whatever reason when they built this that you would only that a guest can never have a permission if the user is not signed in. If there's no user logged in, and you get to a permission check, then the user is null. And if the user is null, they just automatically assume that you can't do it. So if you want to have for instance, with Infinity Next, there's different permissions based on there's anonymous connections. There's anonymous connections that have different permissions based on the board because each board has its own rules. And then there's Tor. So Tor users can't upload images that the server doesn't recognize. If it hasn't been uploaded before via ClearNet, you can't post an image via Tor. So Laravel, for some reason, just completely disregarded the concept of anonymous permission masking. So I had to develop something, and this was the big struggle that I've been dealing with, a way to have an anonymous user. And I used to have a support class called Anonymous that was served instead of a user. But because I had to change it over to match their system, I had to match their contracts as well. They had to inherit certain things that were shared in common with a model, like the user model. This represents a real logged-in user, and that took a long time to figure out because it's not just getting it to work; it's getting it to work adequately in a way that, number one, I'm going to be happy with if this lasts for a year. And number two, I can take out of the system and put into a package, because that's the goal, is that all this permission scaffolding that I'm building for checking if someone can do something in certain areas would potentially be repurposed into a forum project later. In fact, a lot of people, I remember, because in the original Infinity and in whatever the fuck it was that he forked, I forgot the name of the project that he forked originally. But before then, there was like static classes. You had like a constant like role admin, role global mod, role board owner, role janitor. That was like a board mod appointed by the board holder, and then role anonymous. And those were fixed. They were baked into the software. So, they were hard coded, and it didn't change. But with Next, and I'll have to flip back over to Chrome to show this. With Next, you go to board, you go to test, go to roles. I think you can, yeah, you can do anonymous. I think that gonna work. Oh no, I have to fix this still. But for instance, you can edit with the owner and change their permissions. Actually, why is this not working? I guess I only fixed this. Aha! Oh, this is what's working. You go to the site, and this is the permissions for the default permission mask for all the site. I still have to fix the board permissions. I'm updating huge parts of the site at a time to match the new system. You go to role permissions, and then there's all the things. And it's layered so that by weight. For some reason, I decided to call the weight kilograms. I don't know why I did that. But you got administrator, and then the administrator can edit the global absolute, which is like if you have to hard disable something across the system, you can do it never on this. But you get this cool Irish flag looking thing, and it's very similar to what you would get in like Zenforo or something for permission masks. You have allow, inherit, and revoke. And inherit is no, allow is yes, revoke is never. So if you are, for instance, the way that this is set up, proxy user is 20, anonymous is 0. Anonymous by default can upload images. But then on the proxy user, you don't want to go and set attachment create, which is the new images, to never. And that would prevent users via Tor, who are what I call in the system unaccountable. There's no way to punish a Tor user. The only thing you can do is make is to make it so that the Tor connections cannot abuse the system. And the way I do that is by having a CAPTCHA per post, and by denying new images so that people can't upload child pornography via Tor, and they can't flood as much. And that's all the work. It's very similar to how a forum was done. So when Infinity Next was just coming out, a lot of criticism I got was that the way that I had done the permissions was so complicated and needlessly complicated that it might as well have been a forum permission scheme, because that's where it's derived from. It's exactly like how it works in Zenforo and PHP BB. So yeah, I'll have to make a package out of something like this. You have to pull it out and then put it into an environment that is completely detached from the actual project, and then you start doing testing, which is when you write code to make sure that the actual code of the package acts predictably. And then when you want to include the package into the project, you pull it back in as a vendor, and then you do certain small things to make sure that your project can use this code, and you integrate it into the site. So that's what I'm up to right now. It's going to take a lot more work just to get it back to where it was before, because my idea of fixing this was just to upgrade the site and not bother fixing it, and then fixing it once I was getting an error on every page. And so far it seems to be working, but yeah, you try to do something, you're like, oh, this user variable isn't found because there's no more user variables on the controller. You have to use a helper for that kind of shit. But yeah, I hope you find that interesting. Bye bye.